Alex, thanks for joining us today. This is a real treat to have you here. We are facing a whole lot of different issues in the state and across the country, so we look forward to your remarks. For our viewers, obviously there is so much going on here in the state, whether it's current events that it just busted decisions made by judges here in Tallahassee yesterday about the governor's orders of whether or not to reopen schools. Alex will talk more about that, I'm sure, in just a few minutes. Or it's the kind of economic current situation in our state, those kinds of things that are happening, or if it's on a national front, the events obviously that are happening in Wisconsin, the DNC last week, the RNC this week. 2020 is an incredible year, not only for the kind of strangeness that it has brought with the coronavirus and the lockdown and the reopening of the state, but also it's an election year, perhaps you've heard. And we have a lot going on here. JMI remains hard at work. We continue to advance the cause of liberty, not only in the state of Florida, but also across the country and in Washington, D.C. We continue to work on helping to reopen the state safely. We continue to work with the Florida delegation at the national level on how to continue to provide economic opportunity and prosperity for all Americans. And of course, with leadership here in the state, we are looking at things such as the reopening of schools, the future of healthcare in a COVID environment, taxation and regulation, and a whole host of different issues like that. So for those of you who are on today and who are supporters of JMI, I want to say thank you. Your support is never more important than it is now, because we will come out of this election and there will be elected officials at both the state and the national level seeking direction. For those of you who aren't supporters yet, we'd love for you to join the team. It's easy to do. You can contact Austin, or you can contact me or anybody on staff, or you can visit jamesmadison.org. And so we're grateful that you're all on the call today, and I hope it will be educational and informative. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Austin.
Yep, so thanks, Dr. McClure. Rep. Andrade, can you give us an update, a brief policy update on how COVID has impacted your district and your office?
Yeah, absolutely. So it feels like forever ago now, but the Florida legislature, we wrapped up our budget and our session in March, and legislators went to every corner of the state, back to their home districts, and we immediately had to start addressing the issues as they popped up. And if you can recall, in the earlier days of COVID-19, we really didn't know enough about the virus itself, or how it would move, infect others, the treatment policies, and down the line. So, the first step was making sure our businesses had the resources that they need as the governor started incrementally trying to address COVID-19 by shutting down different components of businesses, taking separate approaches, and then we moved into kind of that statewide lockdown that everybody can remember. And that kind of, transitioned us into what I think most legislators would say was one of the toughest constituent times of their careers, with, my office in Pensacola had hundreds of constituents contacting us for help with the unemployment website of DEO, the Department of Economic Opportunity, that manages Florida's unemployment program. So coordinating that has been a very large undertaking, and I need to thank my district secretary, Trevor Shetley, for taking point on that with me and helping to address that. And we're still dealing with folks who've been struggling since March now, trying to access the unemployment that the state has said they're entitled to. As we start looking ahead, figuring out how to unwrap and unwind the CARES Act, especially for counties that, like mine, my main one, Escambia County, is less than 500,000 people. So you don't get direct CARES Act funding. Counties that are, considered smaller than counties like Hillsborough or Pinellas have to either take a grant approach with CARES Act, applying for specific funding, or have to go through the state with a larger pot of money that the CARES Act from the federal government passed down to the states. So figuring out how our smaller counties are going to address those issues, figuring out, how our employees are going to get back to work. For those of you who don't know, House District 2 is one of the farthest west House districts. It borders Alabama. We're a large tourist population, and we also have a very large military population. So thank goodness our military employees, the people that were depending on their paychecks, those haven't been interrupted. But I have the farthest west coastline in Florida, significant numbers of hotels, large tourist economy. And as y'all know, just the economics of it, in good times when you have expendable income, Florida benefits. In bad times when people around the world and around the United States don't have disposable income, Florida hurts. So making sure that we continue to provide the information for our constituents that need help, and making sure Florida can open up safely and people know that Florida is a safe state to visit are going to be key components to our economic recovery in the future.
Sounds great. Thank you for that quick update. I'm going to turn it over to Logan and Dr. McClure now to ask a few more questions.
Thanks, Austin. So Representative, you've just finished up your first term in the legislature. I'm curious what surprised you most about the process?
So one, if y'all don't listen to the Pundits on the Porch podcast that JMI puts on, this is a good plug. I've never had a good answer to the surprises question. I know we talked about it when I did the Pundits on the Porch late last year in 2019, which feels like forever ago.
Yeah.
If you're a state legislator like me, a state representative like me, it's if you run for this office, you should know what the office is before you run. It's the same with any elected office. If you actually don't know the ins and outs of it before you run for it, you probably have no business running, and you need to do your best to know what the job entails. I would say it's not too much of a surprise, but it was just kind of life affirming. You're not famous when you're a state representative or state senator. I think one of the toughest parts was having constituents who had no idea that this office existed, that my office existed, and could help them. So one of the biggest jobs I've had in my first term that I wasn't expecting necessarily was just making sure my constituents knew that they could call my office for help navigating state issues. The state's got a very broad jurisdiction. We very jealously guard that jurisdiction from the federal government whenever we can. And so odds are, if you have an issue, I can help you with it, just because the state, if you've read our Constitution, all power is not delegated to the federal government or reserved to the state and to the people. So we have a very broad jurisdiction. We can definitely help. Making sure that information was available to constituents is probably one of the tougher parts that I wasn't anticipating.
Great. Bob?
Representative, what would you say, obviously we're living in a coronavirus environment that kind of reframes what has happened in the most recent past. But, Florida was in line from a policy standpoint to have some great success, and we did, and we have as a state. Constantly, the state of Florida is ranked as one of the freest in the country, best place to start a business, best place to retire, best place to be CEO, you name the index, we're typically in the top 4 or 5. Having said that, and understanding that we are in a different environment, what would you say were some of your greatest successes that you saw come out of legislative session? And then obviously, given the budget, there are different priorities, but what do you think remains undone that's important going forward?
Well, some of the bills that I was most proud of getting worked through that would kind of resonate with people watching would be, the state's relationship with the Medicaid program is a complicated one. We need to make sure that, we're not subsidizing Medicaid if at all possible. So this past year, we identified, a situation where our school districts were actually subsidizing the Medicaid program by providing these medical services like mental health, physical therapy, speech pathology to students in schools. And every school district in the state has a baseline probably of 40% of their students who are Medicaid eligible, but we didn't allow school districts to bill Medicaid for those services we were providing. So we actually changed the Florida statute. We tweaked it slightly so that our school districts would no longer be subsidizing Medicaid by footing 100% of these medical services and allowing school districts to bill Medicaid the same way that our clinics and hospitals have for decades. And that will result in a savings to Florida and Florida school districts in particular of at least $50 million a year going forward. And it will most likely result in an expansion of those services for students in schools as well. So, it's not, it wasn't a big ticket item, this past year, but that was one that I was very excited to get passed. And, so I passed 15 bills in my first, 2 legislative sessions. Most of them, had a partner in the Senate, a companion bill in the Senate, and most of them become law. I'm waiting on my last bill from this session that passed with the Senate companion get signed by Governor DeSantis. Its effective date's October, and he's obviously had a lot on his plate. So he prioritized the June effective dates, the bills with June and July effective dates far more highly than the bills with October and September effective dates. So this one, the last bill is just how local governments operate with construction contractors. If you can imagine, local government construction projects are a big ticket item. They're a big expenditure. Capital outlay is massive in the hundreds of millions of dollars for a lot of these counties. And so just making sure that they're being honest and forthright with how they're dealing with our contractors is a big deal for me. It'll result in savings and increased competition across the state.
So
Terrific.
You alluded to it in your opening, but COVID hit back in March, at least in Florida, which feels like forever ago. It was 5 months ago, but it feels like a year ago. And at the time, you all were just finalizing the budget. So how do you think the state, at least in terms of policy, I know there was a lot of healthcare reforms that came through really at the perfect time. How do you think the state fared in terms of being prepared for something like this, both policy-wise and budget-wise?
Well, I think first and foremost, and I keep harping on it, we were able to put away $4 billion in reserves in this past legislative session for the state. So we were as prepared as we could be. At the state level, we can't print money like they can at the federal government. And the vast majority of states in the country have to balance their budgets every year, either by virtue of a statute or their constitutions. So we did well as far as saving for a rainy day, but even $4 billion isn't enough to cover what we're facing now. I think Florida overall has done a very good job. I mean, we expanded telemedicine. In the past 2 years, we've been on the forefront of issues like of different policy components that are going to drive down the cost of pharmaceutical drugs for Florida residents, eliminating certificate of need, working on increasing competition, and one big one, and it's not just in healthcare but across the board, was our addressing different licensure components. Not just for the healthcare industry, but for professions overall. I think, for Florida to be successful, for Florida's state budget to come back to where it needs to be, to not have to cut too drastically, so many services, eliminating all unnecessary and arbitrary barriers to entry for people to join the workforce was a big deal. And we passed a pretty significant deregulation package this year, which I was, really proud of. And just making sure that people can get back to work as quickly and safely as possible. I've been very proud of the work that we've been able to get done these past 2 years in the Florida House.
Representative, obviously Florida is a leader in school choice, more school choice programs than any other state in the country. The largest school choice program in the corporate tax income and the voluntary pre-K program, and more students participating in some form of choice than any other state in the country. Given what we're seeing today, and obviously the ruling yesterday by the circuit court judge here in Tallahassee about the governor's order about reopening schools, What are your thoughts? Are there opportunities for more school choice expansion as Florida moves forward?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I know in Escambia County, I mean, the fact that you're even giving parents the option right now of whether or not they're going to engage in online learning for their kids or send them back to a brick and mortar school. You know, empowering parents to make those best decisions for their kids is something that Florida has really prioritized, and I think it's the same. It's the same with industry overall. I mean, having opportunities like this on a Zoom conference call to conference in and talk about these ideas is just one small example of the way technology is going to change education in the future. I think that we'll absolutely have to continue to empower parents going forward, and our school choice model in Florida has been very successful. You know, I think what was always missed because our teacher pay was relatively low compared to other states is our student performance. As we've been pushing these policies has increased to you know, a lot of times 4th in the country. Our students are performing better than almost any other state in the country under our current education policies. And I was happy that we were able to pass the teacher pay raise to be commensurate with that performance. But yeah, you know, I worked on an appropriation this year for one program called Algebra Nation, which allows students to choose their instructor in an online platform and learn the way that they felt they could best learn from different types of instructors and how they speak and communicate to students. So providing more options, empowering parents, you know, providing different learning opportunities wherever kids are all things that are good for students and good for parents. You know, because we're a service economy in large swaths of Florida, especially in my district, you know, you are going to have parents who need and rely on brick and mortar schools to be able to actually go to the jobs that they have. So brick and mortar is not going away, but having other ways to reach students, allowing them to learn the way that they can, the way that they already think, is something that I think Florida's on the forefront of, and I think that we're going to continue having to take those opportunities, you know, to make sure students are progressing at the level that we need them to become functioning members of society once they graduate from high school. But you know, in Northwest Florida, we don't have too many charter schools like other parts of the state, so school choice really has, especially in Escambia County, just increased competition between traditional public schools. You know, I've visited almost every single middle and high school in my district by now, and you know, when you have a principal who's got, you know, 300 more students the next year because their school performance was so much higher than their surrounding schools, they take pride in that. That increases competition, that injects free market philosophies and realigns, you know, how people operate and think. It just brings it back to the human condition. And I think that that's been very beneficial even for just traditional public schools and increasing competition between them.
Yeah, great.
So I have the great joy of managing a lot of JMI social media. And we've seen a lot of responses and a lot of different reactions at the local level related to mask ordinances and a lot of other, you know, all these controversial topics that I never thought that we would be talking about. Do you see this as a challenge to be addressed in policy, or something where local control is the best option here?
Well, so in my non-legislative job, you know, a full-time practicing lawyer. I'm the city attorney for a city called Milton up here in Northwest Florida. And the same week that the city of Pensacola's mayor issued a mask order requiring people when they enter businesses to wear a mask, the city of Milton did the same thing. And it was actually rejected by the citizens. It was overturned. So you're going to just have to see that shift from, you know, state mandates and local government mandates to personal responsibility and corporate responsibility if we're going to get out of this without sacrificing much of what makes Florida so special. You know, I keep trying to harp on, and this has been a good opportunity for me, you know, especially going through this election cycle, to talk about what our Constitution allows as far as our governor and our president and our local governments to do, and what it can't. we're on the border with Alabama. As some of you might know, we had checkpoints at some of our border crossings from other states. And I had a lot of constituents who were ticked off when they found that people from Louisiana or, Washington or New York or New Jersey were still allowed to come into the state. It was a good opportunity for to explain to them that, listen, our Constitution, our U.S. Constitution, protects the right of interstate travel for American citizens. And we were never going to be able to just shut our borders, because we have fundamental constitutional rights. Explaining to people that the governor's authority is not, by fiat, and that the large amount of his authority comes from his ability to grant and take away licenses to businesses is another opportunity, again, to talk about what limits we have and why our separation of powers is so special. The main and only justification I could think of for statewide shutdowns like we've seen is the risk that we assessed and thought of related to hospital overruns. Now that we know our hospitals aren't going to be overrun and collapse under the weight of COVID infections and hospitalizations, you have far less of a justification going forward to invade private interactions. And I think Governor DeSantis has set a great example, and the numbers don't lie. It's been very frustrating to see how Florida's response to COVID-19 has been unfairly compared to states like New York. We've had I think a third of the deaths of a state that has fewer people than we do. We've even had a fraction of the deaths and hospitalizations of states like New Jersey, much smaller states. And that's because Governor DeSantis took a completely different approach. It was far more data driven, and it's borne out. And I think that's another reason why Florida is so special. And that's a story that's not getting told nearly enough around the country.
That's the truth. Maybe Governor DeSantis can write a book on his coronavirus leadership skills, like the governor of New York. Question for you.
I saw that.
Yeah. On the moving forward on the what you will be dealing with in legislative session next year, obviously the budget, fiscal impact of the coronavirus. It's obviously very hard to predict the future. What are some of the issues that you think that this legislative session is going to have to be dealing with as we move forward?
First and foremost, the main issue we're all going to be looking at is exactly how much money we're going to have in the state coffers, right? The CARES Act is going to send some money down to the state. I think it's in the realm of about $9 billion right now, from what I understand. But the way that we balance our budget is through an office run by an economist named Amy Baker, and they project out what our revenues are going to be, and they tell us how much money we have for our state budget. This is going to be a very tight budget year. We don't have a state income tax. I don't anticipate that being on the table. I certainly wouldn't support it. But the way Florida generates its funding to operate the state, is going to take a massive hit because of our dependence on sales tax and dock stamps and property taxes down the line. So the main issue overall is going to be a general one of exactly how much are we going to have in our various trust funds, how much we're going to have in general revenue, and what are we able to cut and eliminate to make ends meet. Because we're never required, our Constitution doesn't require us to pass a single statute or add a single line of law or edit anything. Our one and only constitutional requirement as state legislators is to authorize a balanced budget for the governor for the next year. And making those ends meet, figuring out where to subtract, and if possible where we need to add is going to be it's going to be a tough session. I wasn't around obviously during our last economic crisis with our housing crisis, but I saw what was done during those times, and I think our approach is going to be slightly different this time. But to tell you exactly what we're going to do overall would be, you can't simplify this down without lying at some component. It's going to take every single person in the room, finding minute ways to save the state money to come to that larger number. Because I think right now we're facing at least a $4 billion shortfall in our state income, projected income, and it's probably going to get worse, over time as we continue to see our sales tax projections go down. So it's going to take some creativity. The Florida House the past few years in our appropriations committees, we've gone through these kind of budget exercises where we find ways to reprioritize funding and to save the state money. And I think those are going to become a lot more real. And that homework is going to be a little bit more focused for a lot of legislators going forward.
That's a great answer. I think Bob and I have one more question each before we go to the audience Q&A. So I just wanted to remind folks, I've seen a few questions come in through the chat, but if you do have questions in a few minutes, we're going to get to those. So I would encourage you to put them in there. So we talked about hurricane season a little bit at the beginning, but we're dealing with a pandemic and now in the midst of what is going to probably be an active hurricane season. It has been already, and we're thankful that Marco is spared Pensacola and Laura's as well. What is your legislative life like in between sessions while trying to keep your constituents alert with all that's going on right now?
Yeah, so I'm very dependent on social media to get information out there to constituents. We're a part-time legislature. So we're supposed to ideally have other jobs in our communities where we live. So when I get home from Tallahassee, I come back here to my law office here at Morehill Westmoreland and try and practice. And then I just make sure I have regular town halls. That's obviously all been switched to digital town halls and Q&As in the past few months. But it's really just making sure my constituents are informed. You don't want to be passive. You don't want to wait for emails to come in. I think that's why it's been a struggle, getting that off the ground, because we've, relied sometimes on passive constituent services when it really needs to be active. And so reaching out to constituents, making sure that they know what our office can and can't do, and being available to, I have 2 mayors and 2 county commissions and 2 city councils that I work with on a regular basis, making sure that I'm just a good teammate. I have a stated policy. I've never told them what to do, but you better believe I'm on the phone with them, texting, calling, meeting with them as often as I can, just to make sure that they have the resource and information that they need as well. Because, I'm a strong believer in government close to the people is usually the most effective. So making sure they know I'm there to support them, and a support role is something that I take very seriously. So I look forward to coming home because I get to spend more time with my wife and my now 2 dogs. But making sure my constituents and the local leaders here know they can look to me for help is always the main focus.
All right, Alex, we're going to move to a lightning round. Some of these are serious, some not quite so serious. Number 1, football, college football, ACC, SEC, yes or no? Should they try to have a season?
Yeah. Yes, I'm a huge SEC guy. I was a cheerleader at the University of Florida during the Tebow years. I think that some of those cities, the college towns, depend on that income, and canceling those just outright out of fear of COVID-19 would have a far greater impact. And I'm really just appreciative that Governor DeSantis sees the importance of Florida State game. Has already said that he wants to try and make that happen this year, because I don't want to let FSU off the hook in one of their rebuilding years, for sure.
Mask. What kind of mask do you typically wear when you're out in public?
It's normally reusable. I got these cloth masks that are blue. I got to get a couple of them monogrammed, I think, very soon to make them look a little bit more professional. But the reusable ones are definitely more comfortable.
Are the bars in West Florida, are they open or closed, and what do you think should happen there?
Yeah, that's been one of the most fun licensing issues. We have not everybody knows, but Pensacola takes great pride in the fact that per capita, we have more breweries per capita than almost any other city in the United States. I think we rank 5th at breweries per capita in America. So a lot of our breweries have now become de facto restaurants as well. And DBPR has been very responsive in helping those breweries get their food service licenses as quickly as possible so that they can open as well. You know, bars in service industry areas that depend on tourism and depend on people spending that income need to be open. You know, but they obviously need to be open safely. So just it's again going to be that shift to corporate responsibility and enforcement from now on. I think bar owners and brewery owners, you know, have now learned that if they don't self-regulate, look side to side, and make sure that their competitors are also following the same rules, they're all going to suffer because of it. And I think that they're going to be more and more open over time.
What do you think as a follow-up to that? Obviously, West Florida is a festival area. Really, the whole state of Florida has festivals all the time. What are your thoughts on music festivals and festivals going forward?
I think that they're going to come back. You know, I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic that in the next few months we'll get to a point where dealing with COVID-19 and having those responsibilities in place has become normalized, and having those festivals become more and more available again. You know, nobody wants a hot spot to spike overnight. Nobody wants a massive swath of infections. And Florida is dependent on its perception, both internationally and across the country. But no, I do think that music festivals are going to come back, and I think that you know, hopefully people are willing to come to them in the next year or two.
Last question, more of a policy question. They will be on the ballot in November, this mandatory $15 minimum wage for all businesses. Obviously, that has been a national conversation as well. What are your thoughts on that amendment that will be on the ballot in November?
You know, I think it's incumbent on people who kind of understand supply side economics to be making those arguments to all their friends and family that a $15 minimum wage, a government mandated minimum wage at that level, is going to cripple our economy. You know, I think that while our minimum wage in Florida, you know, has been established, and you can have those academic arguments about whether or not the minimum wage should exist at all. You know, I think a $15 minimum wage would just shock our economic system here in Florida, and we'd see more businesses shut down than we have in the past few months. I don't think our state could survive that right now. And no, I would actively oppose increasing the minimum wage to an arbitrary number like $15.
Great. Logan, back to you.
I think we're going to go over to Austin. I've seen a lot of questions piling up in the chat. So
we'll go to Ronald Weaver. He already asked 2 questions. So Ronald, if you want to go ahead and ask one of your questions to the rep, that'd be great. You hear us?
Representative, have you heard anything in the halls about how Judge Dodson's order yesterday regarding local decision rather than state decision regarding reopening constitutionality, whether or not you feel like Corcoran's team can win that appeal, and if so, based on what legal arguments?
Oh man, you give a lot of credence to my legal acumen, turning over an appellate argument in 24 hours. But
I've been watching.
But no, I mean, these are constitutional questions about how much authority a school district has versus how much authority Tallahassee has, and I think what you're ultimately going to see over time is something kind of like how the federal government's kind of overcome a lot of those state jurisdiction issues, and that's with the power of the purse and making policy decisions dependent on funding. You know, I think that right now, a unified approach as far as how our school districts are going to open safely and having those plans in place is something that'll be necessary. But to know what constitutional limits we have between our 67 counties and Tallahassee is not something that I would want to, you know, venture too far out on, just because, you know, I'm going to learn just as much reading the future orders on that appeal as you are, for sure. I really couldn't tell you off the top of my head what they're going to find on that. But I do appreciate what Governor DeSantis and Richard Corcoran have been doing, trying to make sure the kids can get back into school. Getting them back into school, whether or not that's online or in brick and mortar classrooms, was absolutely necessary. Again, we're not facing those overruns in hospitals. We have to get back to some sense of normalcy, and getting kids back on track educationally is one of the most important components of what we can do right now as a state government. So I appreciate the work they've been putting in to make sure that happens.
Thank you.
We have another one from one of your constituents. Andrea O'Sullivan from Pensacola has one for you.
Hi, Representative Andrade. Thanks for being here. It's pretty cool to be able to talk directly to my representative. So I have a question. I definitely appreciated your comments about keeping your constituents plugged in and aware of what's going on, and obviously representing our interests. My question is, in the next session that's coming up, which might be a little odd because of all the COVID goings on, what issues are kind of on the agenda, or do you know that are coming up that would most affect us here in Pensacola and Escambia and Santa Rosa counties?
Yeah, so if you're talking about policy issues, for those uninitiated in Tallahassee, the main policy issues that are discussed are usually dictated by our new speaker, Chris Sprouse, our incoming Senate president, and Governor DeSantis. Those three are going to be the main thought leaders as far as what main policies and what issues are going to be negotiated between, our two chambers of the legislature and our governor's office. The main issue that's going to affect Northwest Florida going forward is going to be the budget. This past year, I was really happy and proud that I was able to work to get, water quality funding like septic sewer and money to take advantage of federal grants for our estuary programs in our Pensacola and Perdido Bay. Water quality is gonna be a main issue for me going forward, simply because we have legacy pollution from some of our larger industrial operations in Northwest Florida, and our beach and our natural environment are two of our biggest selling points as far as our main economic driver, tourism. That with infrastructure, making sure that FDOT's 5-year work plan stays online, and making sure that our roads and our I don't know what part of Pensacola you live in, but our roads and water runoff need to continue being improved. We're at significant risk of flooding. We need to focus on storm hardening for our infrastructure. Those are going to be the main issues that I'm going to have to continue to be focused on. Additionally, we're one of the most military-friendly states in the country. We need to continue making sure that on the policy side, we're continuing to make sure that the military understands that Florida recognizes its importance, especially for a district like mine with, NAS Pensacola, Corey Station, and then we have our neighboring areas like Hurlburt, Eglin, Whiting Field, making sure that we're doing the best we can to be a good partner to the military is always going to be a main focus for a Northwest Florida legislator. But the main issue overall is going to be that funding component and making sure that we still have money coming up here to improve our environment and our infrastructure.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. So as a native of Northwest Florida myself, I'm really interested on your take on this next question, and Andrea has already weighed in on this, but we'll let Bill Max go ahead and ask this question. I think you're on mute, Bill.
Yes, this is no doubt the most important question you'll be asked all morning. Who is Milton's favorite Bubba? Is it Bubba Watson, the famous pro golfer from nearby Baghdad, or is it Bubba Wallace, the famous NASCAR driver from nearby Mobile?
I'm going to have to say Bubba Watson, even though Bubba Watson now lives in Pensacola. I think Bubba Watson, the importance he's brought to Baghdad, Florida, can't be brought up enough. He's definitely one of our favorite sons. He's also a part owner of our local baseball team, the Blue Wahoos. If you haven't been to Pensacola recently, he's also got an ice cream and candy shop on our main street called Palafox Street. So Bubba Watson for sure.
Now we have one more question on just a point of personal privilege. Bill said that his question was probably the most important one, but I think this one is, we have to know what your dog's names are.
So my mini golden doodle, his name is Dash. His middle name is Young Money. And our mini schnoodle, that's a mini schnauzer poodle. I got to give him his first name, and I called him J.K. Growly. So we call him Jake for short. But the deal was, when I first ran for office, my wife said if I won, she was going to get a dog. And so we got Dash. And when she agreed to let me run again, she said she was going to get a second dog. So now we got two little mini designer dogs running around our house, and they both bring a lot of energy and a lot of love, especially when I'm out there.
I can imagine. So we're running out of time. Just wanted to appreciate everyone for joining us today. We certainly enjoyed the conversation with Representative Andrade from Florida's House District 2. And we appreciate you joining us and taking time out of your morning today. All right. Have
Thanks,
a good
y'all.
one. Bye.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Representative. Thank you.